Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel scores big, taking out an underground Iranian missile factory in Syria. Plus, the October effect. Military and political strategists express their views on what needs to happen next. And an Israeli pocket of resistance on October 7th, an inspiring story about a community 4 miles from Gaza that fought back swiftly with unity. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The IDF released video this week of the Gaza tunnel in which 6 hostages were gunned down by their Hamas captors. And new intelligence has emerged revealing how much the IDF has damaged Hamas's military capabilities. Take a look.
We're going to go down into the tunnel shaft 20 meters below where the hostages were murdered.
Chief IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari described the scene.
They were here in this tunnel in horrific conditions where there is no air to breathe, where you cannot stand. And they survived, but they were murdered by terrorists. This is their blood. This is the blood of Hirsch, Eden, Carmel, Ori, Almog, and Alex. They were heroes, and they were here in this tunnel for weeks or days, we will find out.
Hagari reminded viewers that there are up to 101 hostages still remaining in Hamas hands, with an unknown number still alive. In a videotaped message, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he is doing everything he can to return the hostages and win the war. Israel's hostage envoy Gal Hirsch told Bloomberg News Israel has offered Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar safe passage out of Gaza if his terrorist group will give up power there. That could lead to freedom for the rest of the hostages and the end of the war. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is blasting an international criminal court prosecutor after he urged the court this week to immediately issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his defense minister for war crimes in Gaza. Netanyahu calling that, quote, pure anti-Semitism for its own sake and moral disgrace of the First Order, saying the court's proceedings are, quote, politically biased. But a different action Tuesday from Switzerland's lower house of parliament, which voted to immediately suspend funding for UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The Swiss Senate must still approve it. The lawmaker behind the legislation told the Jerusalem Post, in UNRWA schools, children are taught to hate Jews and Israel. If terrorism is glorified, anti-Semitism is stoked, and violence is incited in UNRWA schools, then one should not ask why a cruel act of terror like that of October 7th could have occurred. Speaking from an IDF intelligence base, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant shared a document from a top Hamas commander, written in May before he was killed in an airstrike in July. The letter to Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and his brother reveals the severity of the losses the IDF has inflicted on Hamas. That commander, Rafa Salami, seen on the right in this photo, wrote, we have lost at least 50% of our fighters. As for weapons, he wrote, we have lost 90 to 95% of our rocket capabilities, and we have lost some 60% of our personal weapons. Yoav Gallant stated the net result is that Hamas as a military formation no longer exists. The defense minister also spoke of a particularly disturbing photo the IDF found in Gaza.
I would like to show you what we find recently in tunnels in Khan Yunis. That's a picture. These are the kids of Muhammad Sinwar posing against the evil event of September 11. This picture shows what we have been fighting since October 7. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas, they are all the same.
The Israeli military is still hunting down Hamas terrorists one by one. And with Hamas so beaten down in Gaza, media reports suggest it's ready to accept an immediate ceasefire based on President Biden's plan from July, but only if there are no new conditions from any side. While Israel's focus seems to be shifting to Lebanon, concerns are also growing over the possibility of Jordan becoming radicalized against the Jewish state. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
The Israel Defense Forces say they have dismantled Hamas's Rafah brigade, eliminating more than 2,200 terrorists and destroying 8 miles of terror tunnels, some 80% of the underground tunnel network beneath the strategic area known as the Philadelphia Corridor. This allows the IDF easier access to destroy the many tunnels around Rafah that link Gaza and Egypt. Hamas used those tunnels to smuggle huge amounts of weapons into Gaza. With Israel increasingly gaining the upper hand over Hamas in the south, the IDF is looking north to potentially launch a major ground operation against Hezbollah.
The center of gravity is moving to the north. We are nearing the completion of our tasks in the south.
Hezbollah showed that it's still a threat this week, hitting Israel with 100 rockets Wednesday and 60 more Thursday. Striking back, Israel is already targeting areas in Lebanon and Syria to weaken the terrorist group before possibly launching an all-out war to stop Hezbollah's daily attacks and let some 60,000 Israelis return home. Israel's defense chief this week visited the troops who would likely take part in a ground invasion.
And this thing is a ready arrow, ready for action. We will know when to activate it.
And Israel apparently scored a victory against Hezbollah and Iran earlier this week when it reportedly took out an underground Iranian missile factory in Syria. Trouble could also be brewing on another border as Islamists just scored big wins in Jordan's latest elections. Palestinians make up at least half of the population in that country, where the political arm of the Muslim Brotherhood won 32 of 138 seats in Jordan's House of Representatives, garnering 500,000 votes. Observers warn it's a victory for the Brotherhood, the radical Islamic group that gave birth to Hamas. Many Jordanians have already been radicalized, chanting in the streets, "All Jordanians belong to Hamas," and "Death to Israel." This Islamist praised his son for murdering 3 Israelis at the Allenby Bridge crossing between Jordan and Israel on Sunday.
I'm honored and proud that I've raised a hero who carried out a martyrdom operation in defense of Islam and Arabism.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week visited the long border his nation shares with Jordan, making certain his forces are ready to handle any threats there.
It is important for us to ensure that this border remains a border of peace and security.
Some experts say Iran is pushing for the overthrow of the King of Jordan. If radical Islamists ever gain control of that country, it could pose one of the biggest and nearest dangers to Israel. Netanyahu warned the challenges along the border have already been growing.
There is an attempt to smuggle both terrorists and weapons across from Jordan into Judea and Samaria and into the cities of Israel.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, some of Israel's best military and intelligence analysts on how the country can win the war and move ahead. The experts gathered at a recent conference here in Jerusalem were laser focused on the times and seasons happening now for the Jewish people. Their main message, be on high alert. Here's the story. This week, experts, parliamentarians, and newsmakers met in Jerusalem as part of a conference by the Israel Defense Security Forum, IDSF, and the Danube Institute, based in Budapest, Hungary. Called the October Effect, it addressed the strategic implications for Israel and Europe in the Middle East war.
Basically, our message is that the fight against radical Islam is a common one between Israel and Europe. We deliberately did it in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, in order to bring people together in Israel, where they attacked us and the West at the same time. Both in the Gaza Strip had ripple effects across the region, across the Middle East, and across the globe.
Michael Friedlich, a member of Belgium's parliament, came with a sobering message about the plight of European Jewry.
Well, European Jewry, most specifically in my country, in Belgium, it's very dire. We have anti-Semitism openly by so-called, progressive voices within the media. That's trickling down to the general population. So online people are no longer ashamed to say that it's the Jews who are responsible for all the evils in the world, and that's terrible.
Friedlich says Iran presents a clear and present danger to European Jews.
Well, we see all over Europe that Iran is trying to attack Jewish sites, not Israeli sites. Both in the UK, in Germany, in Belgium, the authorities have sent out warning messages to the Jewish community to be careful, to beware. So we are worried. We know that Iran has been hit hard by Israel, and they're looking for a weak spot, and they think that the Jewish community is that weak spot. So we must be alert, and I call upon all politicians, colleagues of mine, and members of parliaments and governments in Europe to make sure to protect the Jewish communities.
The atmosphere on the streets in certain cities in Europe is plain dangerous for Jews. Some governments, especially in the more eastern parts of Europe, like Hungary, for example, have been great. They've really drawn a line in the sand and said, well, we're the good guys. And some European countries, unfortunately, are pandering to an increasing Muslim community, which is increasingly radicalizing.
Israeli Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation, Flor Hassan Nahum, says anti-Zionism hides behind anti-Semitism.
I think what's happened is that latent anti-Semitism that was mainly either controlled or disguised as legitimate criticism of Israel is just unbridled and out in the open now.
Despite the global rise of anti-Semitism, ACLJ's Jet Balaban says evangelical Christian support is a bright spot for Israel and the Jewish people.
Israel has a tendency to think very fondly of its Christian friends, mostly as tourists who come here and love to be in Israel and the Holy Land. But we should also realize that the greatest wellspring of support for the state of Israel across the globe is really Christianity, and mostly American Christians and those who take sustenance from them in other parts of the world.
Balaban stressed the importance of the narrative and the power of words.
So, for example, NRB this year, as you know, NRB adopted a policy of calling Judea and Samaria. It's been Judea and Samaria for thousands of years. The West Bank term is an offensive term. It's offensive to Jews. It's offensive to the state of Israel. It's offensive to history. And yet, even the Israeli government and Israeli spokespeople, more often than not, as far as I could tell, use the term West Bank. We have to change those narratives and understand that people who are listening hear the words we say.
IDSF founder Amir Avivi says the time is near to confront Hezbollah.
We have 60,000 Israelis displaced in the north, and it's time they go back home. They can go home only if we launch a full-scale attack on Hezbollah, if we destroy their position in South Lebanon and push them north of the Litani, and inflict a very, very serious damage on all of Hezbollah's capabilities all over Lebanon. Only this reality will enable us to bring our citizens back safely to their homes in the north.
Avivi sees what's happening with Israel from a biblical perspective.
You know, in the book of Judges, each time the Gazans went to war against us, we brought the people, we fought back, and this went again and again and again. And the dynamics we saw in the Bible back then and now are very similar. But after many, many wars at that time, Samson, after all these wars, it was written at the end of the book of Judges, and the land was quiet for 40 years. And we have a responsibility to try and achieve the same goal. If we'll win decisively, we'll be able to bring 40 years of quiet to the people of Israel and really, really have an age of prosperity and security for the long term.
This week, Americans remembered 9/11, when jihadists attacked the U.S. and killed nearly 3,000 people. It was a defining moment for the 21st century and holds special meaning for Israelis who continue the same battle with the same ideology. On September 11th, Israelis and Americans gathered at the 9/11 Living Memorial in Jerusalem to commemorate that fateful day 23 years ago. The memorial, built by KKL-JNF, is the only memorial outside of the U.S. that contains the names of all those that fell that day. On 9/11, Jill's husband never came home.
On September 11th, 2001, I was 3 months pregnant with this baby right here.
Jamie, who never met her dad, now serves in the IDF.
It's also very special to see the connection between Israel and America, and it's hard being here, especially with everything going on. And it really hits home, especially with losing my dad on 9/11. Same idea of hate and terrorism. But to be here and to try to do something to help the situation and to promote peace and to understand what's happening, it helps.
Rabbi Gideon Schluss was a rabbi in Midtown Manhattan on 9/11. He now lives in Israel in the aftermath of October 7th.
It all comes together and it reminds us, how important it is to fight terror, to stand with the truth, to support Israel, to support America, to support democracy.
So many things that were emotional here that tied the two countries together, that tied the vision and the faith of the two countries together. Beyond the immediate pain was the hope. And the young soldier whose mother was pregnant with her, who's an American, but looking for peace in the world, finds her solution in serving the Israeli army. The American firefighter, a man of faith, who comes here, reminded me so much of 9/11, where the firefighters went into the fires. And the truth is that same spirit really is exhibited here in this country, and that's what I was feeling tonight.
Firefighter Lieutenant Ashton Bright from Plantation, Florida, brought a message from his city. It's a city that's passed 3 resolutions in support of Israel.
My message tonight is to the people of Israel that they're not alone in this very difficult time, as well as remembering our fallen heroes from 9/11.
Jewish commentator Hillel Fuld sees a profound connection between 9/11 and October 7th and the bond between Israel and America.
And unfortunately, that bond has only become stronger over the past 11 months when we experienced our own 9/11. And on the one hand, you feel like this day is so special, maybe we should just not make that comparison, but you can't not make that comparison. Primarily because it's the same people who perpetrated it, and it's the global plague of radical Islam.
Fuld says this threat is worldwide.
The global community has to wake up and understand that it's the same people who did what they did back then are the same people who did October 7th here in Israel.
And the forces of good have to put an end to terror. It's enough. How many more of these ceremonies are we going to go? We have 365 days a year. Now 2 of them are marked by September 11th, October 7th. Let's make sure that no other days are going to be marking terror.
Up next, racing toward the battle, how one farming community next to Gaza fought back on October 7th. The October 7th Hamas attacks devastated many Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip. But one of those communities has a different story, one of heroic resistance and remarkable resilience. Our correspondent Chuck Holton brings us this inspiring account.
Ein Habazor is a small farming community just 4 miles from Gaza. As Hamas terrorists invaded on October 7th, this village became an unlikely stronghold of resistance.
We realized for the first second that this is something different. We took the kids to the shelter, and then the chief of security sent us a text message, go to the fence, to the gate to defend our people, they're invading to Israel.
Pretty much every single kibbutz and small village around Israel has one of these big yellow security gates at the entrance, and most of the time they stay open, but the Hamas terrorists took advantage of that fact on October 7th by bringing jamming devices that wouldn't let people close those gates. And a split-second decision on the part of the guard at Ein Habazor probably saved hundreds of lives.
As the attack unfolded, villagers found themselves drastically outgunned.
My brother was the only one with the rifle. That time in the front gate when they came with a pickup full of terrorists and motorcycles. And they came fully armed. It wasn't just a terror attack, that was well military operation.
When Gepner's brother was shot in the shoulder, Yiftach knew he had to get him to a hospital. So he loaded him in his car and sped out the back gate, right into a waiting squad of terrorists.
We saw the ambush of 2 pickups and several motorcycles with a bunch, about 30 terrorists that started massive shooting on the car. My brother was hit for the second time in his hip and in his belly, several bullets. All the windows was exploding. I was managed to drive in reverse. We managed to escape.
Remarkably, no one from Ein Habazor was killed or kidnapped that day. The village's preparedness played a crucial role in their defense.
When the chief of security sent us a text message, they're invading, go out, we already had a group of 70 people that went out without even asking any question. Now it's a different story. Now we have enough rifle, enough handguns, anything we need to independently defend ourselves if there will be a situation like that.
Now, months later, the village is rebuilding and growing stronger.
Now, we are September 1st, this is the beginning of the school year, there are about 85% of the people that came back.
This resilience isn't just about security. It's about building a thriving community in the face of adversity.
We are opening a new sports center here in the Moshav. We're just going to be stronger because there is no other option that we're going to leave this piece of land, this beautiful piece of land, without having our people here.
For Dr. Gepner and his neighbors, the events of October 7th have only strengthened their resolve.
Israel was established after the Holocaust with zero chance to establish the country. We survived the 67 war, the 73 war. Look at where we are now, when we have a strong, maybe the strongest army relative to the size of the population. We're going to win this war. This is not even a question. Keep that in mind. Israel will just be stronger following October 7th.
From Israel, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Still ahead, an urgent call to Jewish people around the world, especially in the U.S., to come home to Israel. Tom Hess, an American author who's lived in Israel for decades, has an ambitious plan to encourage every U.S. Jewish family to relocate to Israel. He spoke with us recently about the latest edition of his book, Let My People Go, and his fervent desire to see Jewish families from around the world move to the land God has always had for them.
The heart of this book is about the Aliyah from the United States of America. And we know that we're on the verge of this happening right now because God says he would bring them back from the north, south, east, and west. And Jeremiah 16 says, I will bring them from the land of the north and all the nations where they've been scattered. He says, first I will send the fishers, then I will send the hunters. And so we see now, for the first time in the Western world, there's an incredible anti-Semitism rising after the Holocaust. And so we see not only in France, which now they say the more the war goes on, the more the Jews are coming back from France because of the anti-Semitism that's rising. But in the United States, we see all over the campuses anti-Semitism rising like never happened before. And I know this is a sign that it's time for the Jewish people to come back, also from the United States of America. Only 120,000 Jews came back from the U.S. in the last 40 years, where 2 million came back from the former Soviet Union. I remember being in Russia in 1986, and in 1986 I asked God, why have the Jews not come back from the United States? I realized why they hadn't come back from Russia, because they were bound by communism, but it was interesting at that point, the Lord said there are more bound in the United States than they are in Russia, but God's going to bring them back because he says, and what I'm sharing about today is Aliyah, first fruits to fullness. I will bring them back, not leaving any behind. He brought all of them out of Egypt, but the book of Ezekiel was written after they came out of Egypt. So he's talking about bringing them all back in this generation. In the end times, they will all come back. All the ones that will be alive in the world will be back in Israel in the last days. So God showed me that it's very important that the Jewish people needed to be warned. So we're sending a message to every Jewish household in the United States in the next couple months before a Feast of Trumpets. And at Feast of Trumpets, we're going to blow trumpets, do trumpet blasts, believing God for all the Jews to return back to Israel.
So how can people be praying for the Jewish people right now?
Well, I think it's very important to proclaim the scriptures, because God's word will not return void. And in our House of Prayer in New York, they've been doing this for 3.5 years, right in the middle of the largest Jewish community in the world. And even in Williamsburg, the largest Orthodox community, for the first time, many of them are saying they want to make Aliyah now. So prayer is a very, very important thing. Many Jews have made Aliyah from reading this book all over the world. We did 5 printings in Russian. We did 12 printings in English. And so the word of the Lord, God's word, will not return void. So be a living epistle and pray for the Jewish people, talk to them, encourage them.
Is there an unprecedented crescendo of prayer for Israel right now?
Yeah, I believe that there's more prayer happening for Israel now in the world probably than anywhere. Although I have to say that unfortunately, because not everyone's watching CBN, they're watching some crazy media, that many Christians in the world are being affected by the negative media sooner than by the Word of God and hearing the truth. So thank you, CBN, for giving the Word of the Lord out.
Tom Hess, thanks so much, and great that you wrote this book many years ago. It's so relevant today. Thanks so much.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us, and please continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, for the safety of IDF soldiers and all those caught in harm's way, and for the return of all the hostages. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.